Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, the Democrats say that our prisons disproportionately imprison black people, black citizens in this country, but are the strong prison sentences what help make the neighborhoods like Harlem and Brooklyn that were historically black safer places than they had been? Ann Coulter chose to write about that in her column, and I welcome her back to the program. She is the author of In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus Awesome, and the new Resistance is Futile, How the Trump-Hating Left Lost Its Collective Mind. Ann, welcome back. You know, I was just thinking that 18 years ago was 9/11, and 17 years ago, I had the pleasure of joining you and some of your friends having dinner at a kind of an ordinary little place in New York, but I was there to do the broadcast, and you introduced me to a young man, a man of the cloth, a young priest, who'd actually run that entire distance from that part of New York down to Ground Zero on that day 18 years ago.
I remember that. We walked around. Didn't you broadcast from overlooking 9/11, or was that a subsequent anniversary?
That was 5 years at the 5-year anniversary. This time I just couldn't get a location 1 year after the event because
I remember we weren't there. Yeah, it was like Midtown or something.
It was, but I can't remember the young man's name, the priest who'd gone down to do what he could do, and which it was in some cases to give comfort and to
last rites for a lot of them.
Yeah, unfortunately. So let's talk about this public policy issue, though, and this is that we've had tough prison sentences for many drug crimes as well that were demanded by representatives of black communities 25 years ago who were having a horrendous problem, and then now we see these prison sentences we're being told they're too long. Now that we have 25 years of safety.
Liberals are enjoying the luxury of having lost the argument on crime for the past 30 years, turning so many cities around. One of the things I didn't want the column to be too long, is that it was the cities that followed Giuliani's policies. I mean, this wasn't an accident. That for years, criminologists have been telling us, warning us, this is how you fight crime. You will arrest, for example, small example, you arrest all the subway turnstile jumpers. What does that do? Well, it creates a sense of order. But a big thing it does is when the aspiring criminals leave their homes, they're not carrying guns or screwdrivers or knives with them because they're going to jump the turnstile and they're going to be taken away from them. Gets a lot of guns off and other weapons off the street. I've been warning about this for years. I wrote a lot about crime, and particularly in New York City. I don't know if you know this, but Bill Clinton used to always brag about how his crime bill drove down the crime rate, and crime in America, it's so much lower during the Bill Clinton administration. No, in point of fact, Rudy Giuliani in New York City was responsible for 1/4 of the overall decline in crime nationwide, violent crime we're talking about. What Giuliani did to New York City was absolutely miraculous, and thankfully a lot of sane mayors followed his policies, including mostly extremely followed with gusto by Mayor Bloomberg, who immediately followed Giuliani. He absolutely kept those criminal policies in place. De Blasio tried to slip away, obviously, but he really couldn't. I mean, New Yorkers, the difference is night and day in New York City. It's just the same way. It's kind of astonishing that 9/11 was 18 years ago, and oh boy, are we getting old. It's astonishing to me that there are all these kids moving into places like Brooklyn, the ultra-trendy neighborhoods with their coffee shops and strollers and tree-lined streets, and have absolutely no idea that you could not go there. You would be taking your life in your hands before Giuliani came in. And all the criminologists saying, what can be done? In these articles I was looking up in the New York Times from that period, it's hilarious, all the excuses they make. And, it just looks like more because the media talks about it. And what can you do? There's nothing you can do. People knew what could be done, and we just needed to do it. I've been warning for years that thanks to, Reagan and Bush judges. We had a lot of left-wing judges, as Thomas Sowell writes about in Vision of the Anointed. Judge David Bazelon of D.C. and Ramsey Clark, the Attorney General under Jimmy Carter, they were just loosing criminals right and left on the street. Their idea was, if we only understand criminals, we don't want to separate them. We don't want to get rid of this archaic idea of punishment. No, a normal person just wants criminals to be kept away from them. Just keep them away, and then life is possible. Well, this is what's been achieved, and now I see, I mean, far be it from me to leap to the defense of any Democrat, but what is Biden being pilloried for? What are all the rest of them and the New York Times going after him for? That 1994 crime bill, which, by the way, did very little to affect crime. It was mostly, a typical Democrat nonsense. But they're claiming that his crime bill, let's say it did something. He has, by and large, not been on the side of criminals, distinguishing him from almost every other Democrat under the sun. He's a reasonable man. That's what they're attacking him for the, quote, mass incarceration movement, or as if mass incarceration it's like a hurricane or oh my gosh, I got the measles. Why are these people incarcerated? I mean, as I've been writing in some of my columns recently, I'm waiting for this innocent, gentle little lamb for liberals to produce to me. No, they just they make stories up, they lie about cases, they just keep saying, oh, all these people in prison for a single joint. No, that's never happened.
No.
It shows that we don't have enough prison space for that.
No, and in fact, if it's 2 million in all prisons, that's 2/3 of 1% of the entire population, and you say that's a lot. Well, it may and it may not be, but we know from past experience, the minute they loosen up the sentencing and sentence people to shorter terms and release a lot of people from prison, take a look at the recidivism rates. They're going to go. Many of them will go out. More than 75% from federal prisons. I think it's more than 50% from state prisons, and they'll do it again, and they'll do it to a member of your family.
Yes, and look, the point is, what is their solution to mass incarceration? We stop locking up criminals? Is that it? Can they be more explicit about that? Because I keep waiting to see all of these innocent people who are in prison. In fact, to get in prison in America, the average number of felonies you've committed is 3 or 4. The cops know who these guys are. Most people in prison are in prison, both in federal and state prisons, are in prison, overwhelmingly, like 90%, as a result of plea bargains. So the official charge on the record is not what the guy's in prison for.
No.
But witnesses can be intimidated. Evidence can go stale if they catch a guy with drugs on him. That's what he'll generally plead guilty to. In any event, what I go through in the column is, oh my gosh, it was totally the African American community demanding that aggressive action be taken. Crack, cocaine, particularly, was tearing up the black communities.
And the violence that went with it.
Black Caucus,
yep.
Jesse Jackson, all of them. But what liberals are doing is foisting more violent criminals, not so much in your and my neighborhood, but in black neighborhoods.
Yeah, and the thing is, what's crazy, Ann? You talk about how old we are. In high school, I was a debater. We talked about James Q. Wilson's broken windows theory from the 70s. So in the 90s, Giuliani actually puts it to work. And James Q. was a liberal. He's a liberal academic. Rudy makes it work. And then 25 years go by and people look around and say, gosh, there's no crime here. Why do we need to lock up all these people? And they have absolutely no memory whatsoever. You got to read the column that she's written most recently. And Ann, it is a pleasure to talk to you. And I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days, maybe on the next anniversary of 9/11. Thank you so much for the time. Coming up in a moment, the left is all about renewable energy, but will they remove restrictions on mining to make the technology behind that energy even possible? You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.